This is something that happened when I was a kid. I lived with my parents and my younger sister. At the time of this story, I was probably like 12 or 13, and the neighborhood that we lived in had a little bit more land. The backyards of all of the houses were kind of large, but the houses were still fairly close to each other. I knew a few of the neighbors, but didn't know any of them very well. There was one house sort of close to us that was next door to the west. Both our house and theirs had decks in the back, and the one next door was kind of small. I remember that I would go outside in the backyard a lot because I was a kid. I would practice playing sports back there and things like that. One time, I remember that I went outside, and I saw the woman who lived next door out on her deck. She was pretty far away, and it was kind of hard to see. It looked like she had binoculars and was looking right at me with them, though, and this seemed a little bit strange. I think it was just her and her husband who lived next door. They didn't seem to go outside much, and we rarely saw them. They also didn't seem to be very friendly. I know that every Halloween we would go to their house, and they would never answer the door. I ignored what appeared to be her looking at me and kept doing what I was doing. I think I was practicing some frisbee golf shots or something like that. I looked up again a while later, and she was still there facing me with the binoculars. It seemed so strange that I just stopped and stared at her to see if I was seeing correctly. She did not move. The woman was just steps from the door to go back inside. I went back to doing what I was doing and looked again a few minutes later. This time, she was gone. I was glad to see that, and I stayed outside for a while. Back then, I was outside basically every day. I'm not sure if it was the next day or a few days later though, but I soon saw her again. This time, I was in the backyard once more, but the woman was inside of her house. She was at a window, and I don't know which room it was, but it was a window on her house on the second floor. It looked sort of out to our backyard. I'm not even sure how I saw it, because it's kind of hard to see in, but I saw her again. She had binoculars on once more, and appeared to be looking at me with them. Now, our backyard wasn't that interesting. I had no clue as to why she would be looking out into our backyard. If she was just watching me specifically, then I found that very odd. I stopped and stared at her again. I wasn't necessarily mad or annoyed with her, but I was just confused. I wanted to know what she was doing and if she was looking at me. She stayed there, staring at me, and I stared at her. She barely moved at all. This went on for like a minute or two straight. Then, finally, I saw her move out of the way from the window. I went back to playing out in the yard after that. Now, each time that this happened, I never told my parents or anybody about it. It didn't seem like that big of a deal, and by the time I would come inside, I would have usually forgotten all about it. But a while after this, maybe a week or so, I really don't know, I happened to be outside pretty late one night. It was maybe like 11 p.m. or something. It was summertime, so I would stay up later, and this also meant that it was nice outside. Now, people were using both of the bathrooms that we had in our house. I really had to go, and being a guy, when this happened, I would sometimes go out in the backyard. Even though it was really late at night, I went downstairs and then out the back door to the backyard. Then I was going to go behind this one tree that we had, but before I got a chance to even walk out to the tree, I saw something. I looked over and noticed a woman stepping out onto her deck. She then put the binoculars up to her face and appeared to look over at me. She was literally right outside of the door leading to their deck. This late at night, that was really odd. I just turned around and ran back inside. It creeped me out, and I just waited to use the bathroom after that. There was no way I was going to go back outside. Still, I forgot to tell anybody. I'm not really sure how I did, but I just did. So that night, I went to bed. My bedroom happened to be down in the basement. Our house was a split level, with 2 bedrooms upstairs and 2 bedrooms downstairs. My bedroom was partly underground and had a window that looked outside. After going to bed, I fell asleep rather quickly, but at some point, I woke up. When I did, I just remembered that I could tell it was still the middle of the night. I heard a noise coming from my window, and I looked over. I was expecting to see nothing. Maybe it was a bug flying against the window with it being summertime. But what I saw was the woman literally standing right outside of my window and looking in at me. It was the craziest sight I had ever seen. I'm pretty sure I rolled off my bed to the other side away from the window and onto the carpet. Then I hid behind my bed. I didn't want to look back to the window. I stayed there for a while, and when I was finally able to look up again, she was gone. I went upstairs and told my parents about it, and the next day, my dad went over to confront them. Her husband answered the door and denied everything. He said that we were crazy, and the husband was really mad about the accusation. My dad ended up cursing him out and then leaving. The woman never even came to the door. But after that confrontation, she never did anything strange like that again. I did see her a couple of times, but she wasn't doing anything weird when I did. Those people moved away like a year later, and a new family moved in. I still think about how bizarre that situation was, though, sometimes. This is something that happened in the last apartment that I lived in. I moved into it in June of 2021 and lived there for 2 years before moving. After I'd lived there for about a year, I had a new neighbor move in next door. For some details on the apartment building, it's relatively new and was built, I believe, less than 10 years ago. I lived on the second floor and was the right before last unit on one end of it. The building has just straight hallways with units on both sides. My apartment had 1 bedroom, 1.5 bathrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. The new neighbor next door got the very last unit on the end. In my time living there, most of the other neighbors were very friendly. I got to know almost everyone who lived on my floor. The person who previously lived next to me was very nice and we would talk sometimes. A man moved in who didn't seem to be quite as friendly. I just talked to him once shortly after he moved in. I didn't really see him much after that at all though. Maybe like once or twice, but I can't specifically think of a time that I did. Probably like 6 months after the new neighbor guy moved in next door. I was up sort of late one night. I heard some pounding on the wall coming from his side. It wasn't that loud because the walls seemed to do well with holding sound, but I did hear it. I figured maybe he was hanging something on the wall and didn't pay it much thought. However, probably the next night, I was actually woken up hearing it again. It was a little bit louder this time, but I'm also a light sleeper. I tried to just go back to bed, and eventually I did. The very next night, though, I was woken up again. This time, in the middle of the night, I woke up to some sounds coming from my bathroom area. The bathroom is connected to my bedroom, and the door leading to it was mostly closed. All of the lights were out, so when I looked around, I couldn't see anything. I was sitting up in bed trying to figure out what it was that I was hearing. I was also a little bit confused from having just woken up. But then I realized what I was hearing. Somebody was in my bathroom. How they got in, I had no clue. I was sure that I had locked my doors. Then I started to hear footsteps. I jumped up from my bed and only grabbed my phone. Then on the way out, grabbed my keys and ran completely out of my apartment. I kept running down the hallway and went down the stairs. When I had made it all the way out to my car, I called my best friend. Thankfully, she was actually still awake. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. She let me come over and stay at her place for the rest of the night. The next day, we went back to my place. We carefully looked around, and I was expecting the worst. I thought maybe it would be all messed up and a bunch of my items stolen. But surprisingly, everything appeared to be in place. Nobody was inside the apartment at all, and nothing was stolen. I was so confused because I was sure that I had heard somebody in there the night before. My friend asked me about everything that happened. As I was telling her, I walked into my bathroom to where I heard the noise. I'm sending an actual picture of my bathroom so that you can see and get an idea as to what it looked like. To describe where I heard the sounds, I realized it was near my shower. Next to my shower to the right is a very large storage cabinet, or maybe you would even call it a closet. I didn't use it much at all. I just stored extra towels and blankets in there. That's kind of where I heard the noises, and I opened it up. When I did, I saw that some things in there were actually a little bit out of place. Then I moved a towel and saw that the wall had a significant crack in it. At least that's what I thought it was. I hadn't remembered it looking at all like that before. On the other side of the wall was my neighbor, the new guy. That's when I realized that he might have been the one in my apartment. I moved the crack a little and realized that a big chunk of the wall could be removed. Horrified, I moved away from there, and my friend and I left. We called the police and apartment management. They did an investigation, and the guy later admitted to creating a hole in the wall and entering my place. He never said what his intentions were, though. I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with him for the last few months that I lived there, but I ended up moving when my lease was up. I just couldn't live there anymore after what had happened. I'm also really glad that I heard the sound when I did and was able to leave my apartment so fast. I'm going to tell you a horrifying story of my next-door neighbor I used to have. I live in a single-family home with my wife and our dog Sparky in a residential neighborhood. There are quite a few different houses on our street, and we have 1 acre of land, as do most of the neighbors. We've lived here for 5 years now, ever since getting married. Our next-door neighbor had been quite a jerk since the day he moved in. He had been nothing short of a nightmare and started living next door to us about a year after we moved in. His name was Dan, and I know that he was recently divorced. I understand that can be hard, and it's okay to be going through a difficult time, but that was no excuse for his behavior. I'm only guessing that that's what caused him to act the way that he did. To give some examples, I would say most houses on our street are pretty nice and well maintained. They're not all that large, but the grass is green and mowed frequently. Most people also have nice landscape and flowers and such. The first time I talked to Dan, he insulted our flowers, saying that we should replace them all and they looked bad. He also made bad comments about my car, a Ford Fusion, saying that it was terrible. He wasn't joking either, like my wife thought he was when I told her about it. She soon found out for herself. When she was outside in the backyard once, she said that he told her our house was the ugliest on the block. When I went outside after, I saw him standing in his backyard, seemingly drunk, telling me to F off. After these first few interactions, I tried to stay away from Dan. The next time I talked to him was like a month later when he came over to tell us that we needed to keep our dog inside at all times. We would sometimes have Sparky out in the front or backyard on a leash. The leash would be attached to a stake in the ground. We did not have a fence around our property at all, but Sparky's leash was not nearly long enough to even come close to reaching past the property line. Dan claimed that he hated dogs and did not want to have to see it in our front yard. I basically took my turn and told him to F off. He angrily walked away. And after that, we didn't interact, but he still made his presence known. He would start leaving his stuff on our property. There were no fences, but there was pretty obvious property lines. Anybody with common sense would be able to tell where it changed from our yard to Dan's. He put his old canoe in the backyard, almost completely on our property. He also had an old patio table that he put in our yard. One day, I had enough, and I moved both of these things over about 10 feet until they were completely in his yard. I was even thinking of having a fence put up because of him. I didn't want to let him win. But just the very next day, my wife came inside in the evening and told me that Sparky was missing. He had been out in the yard on his leash like he often was. The leash was still there, as was his collar, but he was gone. At first, we thought he somehow slipped out of his collar. Dogs can do that sometimes, and I didn't know how else to explain it. My wife and I took to the streets and started searching all around the neighborhood for Sparky. We went to several neighbors' houses and asked them if they had seen him at all, but nobody had. We were worried like crazy and didn't know how this could have happened. For hours, we searched the area until about 9 p.m. When we got back home, I just went into the backyard as my wife went inside to call more neighbors and ask them. That's when I heard a faint bark. I thought maybe it was a neighbor's dog at first, but I just had this feeling like it was Sparky. I walked over to where I had heard it, which happened to be in Dan's backyard. I called out Sparky's name and heard the barking again. I ran over and heard that it was coming from inside Dan's shed that he had in his backyard. I tried opening it, but there was a large lock on it and I couldn't get it open. I ran to Dan's house and pounded on his front door like crazy. He didn't answer though. I was knocking on his door for like 5 minutes without a response. So after that, I called the police. When they arrived, they heard Sparky barking from inside the shed. A short time later, they were finally able to open it. Sure enough, Sparky was inside, and we pressed charges. He didn't get that heavy of a penalty though. I think he just got probation. But he did have to move out of the neighborhood, which I was really glad to see. I'm hoping that I never see him again. This happened when I was a kid. During that time, I lived with my family in a 2-story home on a typical residential street. For some reason, I had always thought that our next-door neighbor was creepy. I didn't have a good reason why, because I was just a kid and I never really interacted with him or anything. I didn't see him that often, but I didn't really want to. The guy was short, sort of thin, and didn't come outside very much. He also didn't seem that friendly, but I really didn't know a whole lot about him. All I knew was that he just gave me a bad feeling. Well, one night, my brother was at his friend's house and my parents went grocery shopping. I was about 12 and was home alone doing homework. I know that I had a lot of homework that night, or else I would have gone with my parents to go to the store. It was dark out and I was in my bedroom on the second floor. Probably about 30 minutes after my parents left, there was a knock on the front door. Immediately, something about this seemed off. It was like 8 p.m. and dark out. Who would be knocking at this time? I knew that we weren't expecting anyone. I sat there in my room thinking of the possibilities. Then they knocked again. I left my bedroom and walked over to my brother's bedroom where there was a view of the front door. When I went to his window and looked out, I saw the next door neighbor. The guy was standing right there on the front step. What could he want? I didn't know. What I did know was that I was not going to open up the door for him. I stayed where I was and watched him. He was just standing there looking around. I saw him press his face up against the window. Then he stepped back and casually started walking away. He cut through the grass back towards his yard. I thought that he would be gone then, and I started to feel better. I returned to my bedroom, only to be interrupted about a minute later. What I heard was the sound of somebody at the back door. Now I could kind of see this area from my bedroom window. I looked out and saw the man trying to open the back door. Thankfully, it was locked. He then stayed at the door for a while before finally walking away. I was really scared now. This guy had actually tried entering our house. I had been right to think that he was creepy. After a few minutes went by, I went downstairs to make sure that he was gone. When I got down there, as soon as I entered the dining room, I saw him looking in the window. He looked right at me and then moved out of sight. That was a really scary moment. I turned and ran all the way back upstairs. I had no cell phone back then, so I had to go back downstairs to make a call. For several minutes, I was too scared to. Finally, I left my bedroom and went back downstairs. Then I called my parents, who luckily were on their way home. When they got home, I told them all about it. My dad went over to talk to the neighbor, but he didn't answer the door. We considered calling the police, but didn't. Honestly, we should have. The next day, my dad went back to the guy's house again. This time he answered and denied everything. After that, I was terrified of him and didn't want to be home by myself. My family and I ended up moving from that house across town less than a year later after this. We didn't move because of the man. It was because of my dad's work, but I'm glad that we moved away from him. I'm not sure why he tried to go into our house, but I'm really glad that he didn't. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. I live on the first floor, and this is something that happened not too long ago. In fact, it was just a few weeks ago and is still very fresh in my mind. I've lived in this apartment building for a little over a year. Even though I've lived here for a while though, I really don't know many of my neighbors. I do know a couple, but most of the people here kind of keep to themselves. Everyone who I've interacted with has been very nice though. The building is pretty large, and I'm not sure how many people live here, but it's a lot. One night, I was by myself watching a movie. It was pretty late, maybe like 11 p.m. I was in the living room and on the couch, and out of nowhere heard a knock at my front door. I wondered who could be knocking on my door so late. I paused the movie and got up from the couch. When I got to the front door, I checked. My next-door neighbor was there. I recognized him, and I really didn't know him all that well, but I had said hi to him in the hallways once or twice. I unlocked the door and was going to open it. I had no reason to think anything suspicious of him. But as soon as I unlocked the door, I heard him walking away quickly. By the time I had opened up the door, he was gone. I even heard his door closing moments later, but didn't see him. I just shook my head and went back to my living room. This was very strange, but whatever. Maybe 20 minutes later, it happened again though. I was sitting on the couch and heard a knock on the door. I walked over faster this time. When I got there, I looked out the peephole. I saw my neighbor running away from the door before I had even tried opening it. Now this was really odd. I didn't know what he was doing. For the rest of that night, though, he didn't come back. The next morning, as I was leaving my apartment to go to work, I had the thought to ask him what the deal was. I stopped at his door and knocked. He answered and was really friendly and seemed normal. I told him about the night before and asked him what was going on. He acted all confused and said that he had no idea what I was talking about. I told him that I was sure I had seen him. He still denied it though, and said that it must have been somebody that looked like him or something. I wasn't really buying this. I just agreed with him to be nice and then left. I got back from work that afternoon and things were pretty normal for the rest of the day. Fast forward to that night though. I went out onto my balcony just briefly to see how the weather was. I wasn't out there for long and went back inside. We have balconies on the first floor, but they're like 2 feet above ground, so it's the same thing as the people's balconies on the second and third floors, just not high up at all. It makes it so everybody can have an outdoor space that's the same, and the landscape doesn't allow for the first floor residents to have patios. Anyways, after I went inside, I was in my bedroom when suddenly I heard my sliding door from the balcony opening. I first went towards the noise and looked out to the living room. I saw my next door neighbor entering my apartment. I ran to my bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. Just moments later, he arrived at the door and tried opening it. I wasted no time and got out my phone and called the police. I yelled at him that I was calling the police as well. He tried opening the door a couple of more times and then banged on it a few times as well, but said nothing. Then, only a few seconds later, I heard him walking away and he was gone. The police showed up a while after that, and I reported the whole thing. At first, my neighbor denied it, but there were security cameras outside which proved his guilt. I'm really glad that the cameras were there. I haven't had to worry about him since, and he's not allowed to go near me. I still live in my apartment, but always make sure to lock the balcony door. This is a story about my strange experiences with an old neighbor. It all started about 5 years ago. I moved into a standard house in what I thought was a really nice neighborhood, and it was for the most part. Everybody that I met around my street was really nice, but my next door neighbor to the west, I never met. From the time I moved in, I would rarely see anybody outside on his property, and things around the yard were really simple. Still, I knew that somebody lived there because there was always a car in the driveway. But overall, I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to what my neighbors were doing. One day though, I was outside getting my mail. After I got the mail from the mailbox and was starting to walk back up the driveway, I noticed my next door neighbor. He was standing at one of his front windows of his house and was just staring at me. He appeared to be looking right at me, almost glaring. It was really awkward, and I looked away and to the letters of mail that I had in my hands. But after traveling a few steps up my driveway, I had to look again. He was still looking at me, and he almost looked angry. I smiled and waved at him. I kind of expected him to at least wave back a little, but he just kept staring at me as I walked all the way to my house. That was a really strange first interaction with my next door neighbor, I thought. It had already been about 6 months since I moved in, and this is the first time that I had seen him. I thought that the guy must just be really unfriendly, or he was just weird, or maybe he disliked me for some reason, although I had no idea why he would dislike me. It's not like I played loud music or had parties at my house. I couldn't think of any reason why. It didn't really bother me too much though. Sometimes people are unfriendly. What are you gonna do? Probably about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks went by since I had first seen my neighbor before I saw him again. The next time I saw him was when I was getting home one night. It was like 10 p.m. and dark out. I saw my neighbor standing at his window again, staring at me, just like the previous time. I saw him as I got out of my car, and then I didn't look at him again until I was at my front door. When I looked back, he was still staring at me. That was only the second time that I noticed him, but he sure seemed strange to me. After going inside, I went to bed maybe an hour later. I woke up in the middle of the night though. I just remember that when I woke up, I was really thirsty and it was almost 4 a.m. Occasionally, I wake up in the night really dehydrated, and then I just drink some water and go back to sleep. This night, I didn't have any water in my bedroom, so I got up to go to the kitchen. When I was on my way there, I passed by the living room window. My neighbor was standing in my front yard, staring right into my window. It was the same stare that he always had, and he was maybe 10 feet away from the window. I will never forget the feeling of shock that I had when I saw him. It was terrifying. I ran out of sight of the window. When I got to my kitchen, I remember that I was pacing around wondering what on earth my neighbor was doing. After a couple of minutes, I felt better. I got some water and decided to go back and see if my neighbor was still there. When I returned, he was gone. I walked around every window of my house looking outside, but I didn't see my neighbor at all anymore. After that, I went back to sleep, although it took me a while. The next day, I was still thinking about it and decided that I was going to go over and talk to my neighbor. I really didn't want to, but at the same time, I felt that I should. When I walked into his front yard, he was not looking out of the window or staring at me. I knocked on his door, and he didn't answer at first. The car was in his driveway though, so I knew that he was home. I stayed on the front step and rang the doorbell this time. Finally, the door opened. I saw my neighbor, the same guy who had been looking into my window the previous night. I smiled and offered out my hand for him to shake, and I introduced myself. He didn't shake my hand though, and just asked me what I wanted. I told him that I thought I saw him in my front yard the previous night, and I was wondering what he was doing. He denied it, cursed at me, and then slammed the door in my face. I walked back to my house. I only saw him one other time. About a month after this took place, I saw a moving truck in his driveway and moving guys loading up some furniture. I saw my neighbor with them as well, and I gathered that he was moving. I can't say that I miss him at all, but I'm still left with questions about what he was doing. I also wonder if that's the only time he stared into my windows. My name is Denise, and I used to live in an older apartment close to the city. I lived in it for 1 year total. Over my time living there, I got to know a couple of my neighbors, but not many. I would see some people around the building or in the hallways, but most of them I never had any conversations with or anything. After I'd been living there for almost a year, something odd happened. It was really late at night on a Friday. I was staying up late watching a movie, and I was by myself. All of my lights were off, and I was eating popcorn when suddenly I heard that somebody was trying to enter my apartment. The front doorknob was rattling, and it startled me. I paused the movie and listened close. The doorknob turned several times. I kind of expected somebody to knock, but they didn't. Whoever was there tried opening the door again. I got up as quietly as I could and tiptoed over to my front door. It wasn't that far away, and when I looked out the peephole, I saw a guy standing right outside. He appeared to be looking closely to my doorknob or lock area, so I couldn't see his face at first. As I leaned my face against the door moved a little bit. When it did, the guy at my door backed up and I saw his face. It was one of my neighbors. I didn't know his name, and we had said hi to each other a couple of times in the hallways, maybe once or twice. I knew that he lived on my floor and across the hall, about 4 doors down. After he backed up, I saw him walk away back towards his place. I was kind of creeped out. Why was he trying to get into my apartment? I stayed up for a while and looked outside of my door a few more times. I never saw him again though. I was finally able to go to sleep at like 3 a.m. The next morning, I woke up at about 9. When I left my bedroom, I thought I heard something at my front door again. I don't know if I was just paranoid now, but I walked over and looked out of it once again. The same guy was there, my neighbor. He then tried opening the door again. When it didn't open, I saw him just turn around and walk away. I did my best to make sense of this, but I had no idea what he was doing. A couple of days went by. I was leaving to go to work and happened to see my neighbor walking in my direction like we were going to cross paths down the hallway. I wanted to turn around and go back to my place, but I decided not to. When we made it within about 10 feet of each other, we made eye contact. That's when he said hi to me and told me how he had gone to my door the other night. He said that he didn't know if he woke me up or not, but he had accidentally tried to enter my apartment, and he apologized. He told me that he had gotten back home from the bars with friends and was a little drunk. I told him it was all right, and I understood, and then we went our separate ways. But I didn't understand. At first, it all made perfect sense to me, and I felt relieved. But after I thought more about it, I realized that he didn't really seem drunk when he was messing around with my door. And the way that he was messing with it, it was like he was trying to break in, not like he thought that he lived there. And even if he was just drunk, why did he come back and try to get in again the next morning? I don't think that he would still be drunk and wander back to my apartment at 9 a.m. I tried to just tell myself that I was making more of it, and he was telling me the truth. A few more days went by. It was late at night again, and this time I was in my bedroom on my phone. The time was probably about 11 o'clock, and there was a knocking at my door. It was kind of quiet, but I heard it. I got up, walked over to the door, and looked outside. The same guy was back. As I was looking out the peephole, he knocked again. When he knocked, I accidentally bumped the door forward again with my head. Like I said, my place was kind of old, and the door would rattle in the hinges really easily if you touched it. When the door moved slightly, the guy quickly ducked around the corner. Everybody's doorway went in a little, so if you hid around the corner right in front of it, you could not be seen. I'm not sure what he was doing, but I didn't like it at all. I kept watching, and after about 30 seconds or so, he moved back into view and knocked again. I kept still and did not move. He knocked once more and then finally left. I don't know what he wanted, but I just had a bad feeling about it. Less than a month later, I moved out of that apartment, and I'm glad that I did. Last year, I lived in Oregon for the year. I don't live there anymore because I changed companies. I moved into a house about 20 minutes outside of Portland. The area was pretty nice and I enjoyed it, but just my third night living there, somebody tried breaking into my house. I was setting up a TV stand in my bedroom when I heard some noises coming from the other side of the house. I started to walk over, wondering what it was. I made my way out of my bedroom through the hallway and near the dining room. When I was walking over to the dining room, I heard the back door open. I was not expecting that. I backed up a few steps, and I briefly heard footsteps in my house, and then they turned around and left, and I heard the door open and close again. I went over to my side window and looked outside. I saw a man walking away at a pretty fast speed, but as he was walking away, I got a really good look at his face. He was about average height and had dark brown, kind of messy hair. I went over to my back door and locked it. I'm not really sure how the guy got in, but next I called the police. They came out to my house, but the man was long gone by then. I gave a description and all the information that I could, but it really wasn't much to go on. I was hoping that the police would be able to find whoever had done it, but after they left, I didn't feel too confident. I just didn't really feel like I gave them enough information, and the man would probably be long gone by now. I was a little bit concerned that whoever the guy was would be back. A few days later, I was outside doing some yard work. I was pretty close to the street, and I noticed somebody was walking down it in my direction. Beyond that, I didn't pay much attention because I was focused on what I was doing. When the man walking down the street reached me, he did not walk past, but he stopped where I was and said hi. I turned around and saw the guy. It was the same man who had broken into my house. He was smiling now and asked me if I had just moved in here. I tried to act normal and I said yes. He was really friendly and said that he lived just down the street. We talked for maybe a minute, but I wasn't able to keep the conversation going very well for obvious reasons. I'm not sure if he picked up on it or not that I had seen him. I really don't think that he thought I had seen him at all. Why would he go over to me if he did? After we talked, he walked away. I went back to the police after that and told them the information. It turned out that the guy did in fact live on my street, but he denied it, and the police had no solid evidence, so I couldn't really do anything. I did install a security camera at my front and back doors. However, nothing else strange happened. I don't live there anymore, and I'm glad that I don't have to live near that guy. I still wonder why he was trying to break into my house, though. This story took place last summer. I live by myself in a small house, and it's in a pretty big neighborhood where the houses are sort of close together, so I get to know most of my neighbors. The house next door to me to the west was for sale, and finally somebody bought it. I saw that a middle-aged guy moved into the house, but beyond that, I didn't know much. As the time went by after that, the guy seemed sort of creepy and elusive. He always had an angry look on his face and rarely came outside. When he did, he would just sort of stand outside and look around or get his mail. I tried to have conversations with him a couple of times to be friendly, but they were quickly shut down. For the most part, I just tried to give the guy his privacy and figured he just liked to be alone. Then one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and was very thirsty. I went into my kitchen to get some water. As I did, I noticed that the neighbor was outside, sort of between my house and his, and seemed to be pacing back and forth. This was strange to see as it was the middle of the night. The guy then went back inside and came out less than a minute later. He then looked up at me and we made eye contact. The man looked really surprised and then walked quickly back inside. It felt really awkward to me that he had seen me staring at him. I went back to bed, but by the next day I had forgotten all about it. I didn't see the man at all that day. The next night, I once again awoke at 3 o'clock in the morning. This time, I wasn't as thirsty though. I sat up in bed and looked at the time, Then I rolled back over to my other side to get some more sleep. But as soon as I laid down, I heard a noise. It was a very small noise of something touching my window. I then sat back up again. I listened closely, and it sounded like there was a light tapping coming from my bedroom window. Then came a noise which was much louder than the others. I reached for my light switch and turned my light on. It revealed a silhouette of a man coming from behind the blinds outside my bedroom window. Whoever it was quickly ran away and went out of sight. I got up and walked around the house after that and looked out of all of my windows, but I didn't see anything strange. Then I went back up to my bedroom, and it took a while before I was able to fall back asleep. The next day, I went all around my yard and looked for any evidence if it was there the night before. Couldn't really find anything though. After that day though, I never saw my next door neighbor again. He must have left without anybody noticing, because a couple of months later, we just saw a for sale sign on the house and learned that the guy who lived there hadn't been there at all for months. I think it was him who I saw outside my bedroom window, but I don't know why he was there or what he was doing. I used to live by myself in an apartment in the city. From just about the very day I moved in, strange things started happening. I think it was like my third or fourth night there. I got a knock on my door at almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I opened it up and saw nobody there. I looked all around the hall, but there wasn't anybody in sight. Then, the next day, I saw on the floor outside my door was just a cover page of a magazine. The guy in the front of the magazine had his eyes poked out, and there was a large X over his face. I was confused and figured maybe there was a kid pranking me or something like that. Over the next few weeks, things like this continued to happen. Sometimes I would hear knocks coming from the other side of my wall in the living room. Other times I would get knocks on my front door or other weird types of mail showing up on my front step, things that I didn't ask for. During the day, I would occasionally see people coming or going from their apartments. The guy that lived next door to me was a younger looking adult and seemed like just an average guy. One day as I was leaving though, I thought I saw him approaching my door, and when I stepped outside, he quickly walked back inside of his room and slammed the door when he saw me. I noticed that he appeared to be holding a magazine or something like that in his hand, and based on the evidence, I thought he might be behind the things that were happening. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, so I decided to go to his apartment and confront him. I wouldn't do it if I wasn't sure that he was behind it, but at the time I was about 90% sure. I was nervous, but I was tired of the weird things happening and wanted them to stop, so the next day I went over there. I knocked on his door, and he answered it looking sort of confused. The guy had sort of curly hair and glasses, and he asked what I wanted. I told the man that I was his next door neighbor and pointed to my room. The guy said, "Yeah, I know." I told him how strange things were happening to me, and some of the noises that I was hearing sounded like they were coming from his room. I then mentioned how I had seen him look like he was about to put something in my front step. The man completely denied everything. I asked him if someone else lived with him who was maybe responsible. The man told me that he lived in his apartment by himself and had lived there for several years and didn't appreciate me accusing him of this stuff. He then suggested maybe I was just going crazy and then slammed the door in my face. I was pretty disappointed on how it went talking to him, and I went back to my apartment feeling pretty embarrassed. I realized, though, that it wasn't a very good plan that I had to confront the guy. After that, the strange things kept continuing. I got a few more random pieces of paper at my front step, some with red X's on them, others with curse words probably directed at me. Then one night, I got a knock on my door very late at night, and of course nobody was there. Then, a few minutes later, I heard a distinct knocking coming from the other side of my wall that was 100% coming from the man's apartment. I was so angry that I stormed over and started pounding on his door. I kept knocking on the door and yelled for him to open up, but the man wouldn't answer. A few minutes later, the door across the hall opened, and I saw a woman who was wearing pajamas come out. She looked like she had just woken up, and she asked me what I was doing. I explained the situation to her, and she told me that the guy who lives there's name was Mike, and he had left the day before and was out of town for a week. When I heard this, I didn't know what to do. I felt bad for waking the woman up. I told her sorry, then went back to my apartment and went to bed. I decided after that to just move out. I I stayed there for a few more weeks. Strange things happened up until about a week before I moved, and it stopped. I'm glad I don't live there anymore because it was very weird. I'm a 26-year-old female. Last year, I moved into my first house after living in an apartment for a few years. It was an older house in the neighborhood outside the city that I worked in. I really liked it a lot and was excited to have a front yard to plant flowers in and a back patio to sit out and enjoy nice days. As for the house itself, it had 2 floors and was a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom house. When I moved in, I saw my next-door neighbor outside in the front yard. He watched me move my stuff in as my parents and friend helped me. At one point, he offered to help us. The guy said his name was Jerry, and just came off as a little creepy to me. He was an older guy who, for whatever reason, just had a sort of scary look to him. We turned down his offer because we didn't need the help, and the guy went back on his front porch and just watched us the rest of the time. The next day, when I was all moved in, I was by myself in my living room watching TV. I then heard a knock coming from my front door. I looked at the clock and saw that it was almost midnight. I looked out my window then and noticed Jerry was standing there. He was on my front step and then looked directly over to me and waved. I didn't know he could see me in the window, and I wasn't planning on answering the door this late, but after I knew he saw me, I figured I had to. I walked over to the door and opened it. Jerry asked me if I was having a good time watching TV. I told him I was just about to go to bed and asked him why he was knocking on my door so late. Jerry said he wanted to invite me over for dinner the next night as a welcoming to me for moving in. I really didn't want to and told him that I was busy the next night. At the time I wasn't, but I didn't want to go to his house. He seemed disappointed, but then said maybe another time. I said yes, maybe another time just to be nice, and then he walked away. I then turned off all my lights and went to bed. I couldn't help but feel creeped out by this guy. The fact that he knew that I was watching TV meant that he had looked through my window, and him knocking on my door at almost midnight was really weird. The next day, I went to work, and afterwards got food with one of my friends. I went home after that, and I would say it was about 7 p.m. or so when I arrived. When I got inside my house, I took off my shoes and began walking to my bedroom. Just then, I heard a noise coming from down the hall near the kitchen. There was definitely somebody inside my house. I heard the footsteps coming towards me in the hallway, and didn't want to stay there and wait to see who it was, so I ran back to my front door and didn't even bother putting my shoes back on. I ran outside and got to my car. Once I was inside my car, I backed out of the driveway. As I was starting to drive away, I saw my front door open in my house behind me. I saw Jerry exiting my house and sort of running back to his. I pulled over my car and called the police. I sat on the other side of the road and waited for them to arrive. When they did, they went to Jerry and confronted him. He admitted to breaking into my house and was caught. After that, I didn't have to worry about him anymore. A few months later, someone else moved in, and since then, it's been great. Several years ago, my job had me relocate for about a year. It's something that I've done a few times for work, and each time the company offers to find me a place or gives me the option to find one on my own. I decided to just let them find me a place this time because I was really busy with work and didn't feel like the hassle of looking for a new house. They ended up giving me a pretty nice place in a city type of neighborhood. I liked the house and had no complaints about it at all. I quickly realized, though, that there seemed to be nobody living in the house next door to me. The lights were always off, and there was no cars in the driveway. The grass in the yard was also very overgrown. It was a bit of an eyesore to look at, but other than that, I really didn't care. I pretty much spent my time at work or just relaxing at home. One night, I got into my bedroom and was about to go to sleep when I glanced out my window. The window sort of lined up with the neighbor's window next door, and I noticed a man looking at me. We made eye contact for a split second, and then the man's head disappeared down into the dark room that he was in. This nearly gave me a heart attack because I was sure that nobody lived there. The man appeared to be somewhat old from what I had seen, but I really didn't get a great look at him. I didn't see anybody after that for about another week. But finally one day I saw an older man walk out of the front door to the side of the house. I watched him from my window as the man seemed to kind of just stare at the side of his house for a while, and then return back inside. I realized that I did in fact have a next door neighbor, but he just seemed to be kind of strange. I didn't see him much, but I occasionally saw him here and there over the next several weeks. He always seemed to be doing sort of strange things. One day I saw him go outside and walk into my yard. He appeared to just stare at my house for a couple of minutes. I almost went out and talked to him, but he kind of creeped me out, so I just watched him from the window. Eventually, he went back inside. The next day, I happened to see another one of my neighbors out getting mail, so I decided to go over and ask him about the man who lived next to me. But I was told that nobody lived in that house. My neighbor across the street told me that the house next door to me had been abandoned for almost 2 years. I got the chills when he said this. I told him what I had seen, and we both decided to call the police. They came and searched the property of the house next door, but didn't find anyone. I lived there for the rest of the year, and then I moved again. I never did see the man again, but sometimes I would think I heard noises coming from next door. I'm a female and recently graduated from college. This story happened to me last year when I first got my degree and started my real job. I moved into the city and got an apartment that I really liked. It was right near downtown and I could walk to lots of places. The apartment building itself was rather large and had many people living there on several floors, but it was very nice inside and came with furniture. I remember when I first got done moving in, my neighbor from across the hall came over and introduced himself as Carl. Right away, he kind of gave me the creeps. He just seemed a little bit off. He asked me a few questions about myself and then basically asked me out within 5 minutes of meeting. I politely said no, but he didn't seem too happy about it. Over the first few months of living there, he always seemed to leave his apartment at the same time as me. He would always say hi and ask me where I was going. I like when people are friendly, but the way he would say things was just borderline creepy, but I tried to be nice about it overall. Eventually, though, it just became too much, and I would kind of try to avoid him. Then one night, as I was eating in my living room by myself, I heard a small noise outside my door. I quietly got up and walked over to it, trying not to make a sound. I looked out at my peephole and saw Carl crouched down on the floor looking at my front door. I wasn't really sure what he was trying to do, if he was planning to open the door or if he was trying to eavesdrop on me, but it was very creepy either way. Finally, after about a minute, he left. This had become a little bit too much, and I considered reporting him or even moving. The next day, I had my friend over after work, and we hung out in my apartment for a bit. Then we both went out to the parking garage where we said goodbye. I went back up to my apartment after that. When I got back inside, I was getting some water when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, so I walked over to see. I looked around but didn't really see anything at all. I even went into my bedroom and looked around. Then I knew I heard the sound of footsteps coming from inside my living room, so I ran to my bedroom door and shut it. Thankfully, it had a lock on it. I locked the door, then I heard footsteps coming towards it, and Carl's voice asked me to come out. I was silent and dialed 911 on my phone. Carl then tried to open the door, but once he realized it was locked, he called out saying he was strong and he knew he would be able to break the door down, so I should just come out. I didn't doubt that he could because it was a pretty weak door. With 911 on the phone, I opened my window and went for the fire escape. I tried to do it as quietly as I could. Once I got the window open and was going out, I heard Carl start shouting and banging on the door. I climbed out and was able to make it down. Then I ran across the street to a local supermarket. I waited there until the police showed up and arrested Carl. He had been able to sneak into my apartment because I had forgot to lock it when I went to the parking garage. This happened last fall. I live in a pretty normal neighborhood. Each house has about a half-acre lot, and most of the houses are 2 stories. One night, I was inside watching a show on Netflix. I got really into it and ended up staying up until almost 3 in the morning. Anyways, at some point I went into the kitchen to get something to drink. I know it was really late at this hour, and I casually looked out my window. As I did, I thought I saw my next door neighbor Dan in his backyard. I looked closer and saw it was in fact Dan, and he was in his backyard digging. It wasn't a great angle, but that looked like it's what he was doing. It seemed strange all right, and I really didn't know Dan all that well. We had only spoken a handful of times briefly, but he seemed like a really nice guy, and I knew there was an explanation for it, so I just went back to my show. The next day, I happened to see Dan as I was leaving for work. I waved at him and he waved back at me. Me being the friendly, talkative guy that I am, I told Dan I had seen him digging in his yard overnight, and I asked him what he buried. I said it and meant it in a joking way and expected Dan to laugh it off, then explain some logical reason for the digging. But instead, Dan's smile disappeared off his face, and he told me he wasn't digging. He paused and then said he had thought he saw a fox in his yard, so he went out to investigate. I knew I had seen him digging for a fact, and I don't know why he would try to hide it like that. I left and went to work, feeling more suspicious about Dan. The next night, I once again got addicted to another show on Netflix. It was something that happened to me often. As I was watching this show very late, I suddenly heard the sound of my back door being opened from downstairs. Unfortunately, it was a door that I rarely locked. I got up, not sure which way to run. After a couple of seconds, I saw Dan in my house. He was making his way up the staircase. He said to me I needed to forget what I saw. I tried to reason with him, asking him what exactly it was he was doing, and I really didn't see anything. Dan told me he wanted to know everything that I saw. I immediately suspected the worst and was afraid he had killed someone or something. I told him I didn't know a thing. Dan then just took off and ran back down my stairs. He left, and once he was gone, I ran down and locked the door. I then called the police, of course. I heard a car screeching away and figured it had to be Dan leaving. When the police showed up, I told them everything. It wasn't until several days later that I got an explanation from police. Dan hadn't killed anybody, but he had stolen some really expensive software from a company he had been fired from. He'd taken it out to his yard and apparently was burying it. The whole thing still confuses me and creeps me out. A couple of years ago, I moved into a duplex. I had just graduated from college and got my first job. It was a pretty decent neighborhood, and I was looking forward to starting a new chapter of my life. After I moved in, I met my next-door neighbor who lived on the other side of the duplex. He was a man named Rob and appeared to be in his 40s. He said he had been living there for 10 years, and he seemed like a pretty nice guy. He even helped me move a couple of my bigger furniture pieces into my house. The first couple of weeks went by really well. I liked my job a lot, and I was enjoying the house as well. One day, however, after work, I got a painting to hang up on my wall. There was a random screw in the wall of my bedroom, and I wanted to cover it up. The screw was pretty hard to see, but I still wanted to cover it up because I'm a perfectionist. When I got home, I went into my bedroom and positioned it against the wall to see what it would look like. But when I did, I got a closer look at the screw. I hadn't seen this before, but when I looked closer, it was actually a peephole. I looked through the peephole. I could barely see it, but I saw an eyeball looking back at me. I jumped back. The other side of my wall was my neighbor Rob. I ran and found some tape and quickly covered up the hole. Then I heard a knock at my door. I looked out my window to see Rob. I didn't want to answer it. I was way too creeped out. Then he tried opening the door. After a couple tries, he went back inside. I immediately called the owner of the property and told them the situation. They allowed me to get out of my lease and move out, which I did the very next day. I didn't see Rob the next day, and his car was gone. I'm glad, because I never want to see him again. Last year, we had a new neighbor move in next door. From the very first day he moved in, he gave me the creeps. He was in his 50s and looked kind of sloppy. He had a beard, gray hair, and wore baggy clothes. He just seemed a little odd and wasn't very friendly. My parents and I talked to him the day he moved in, and he just seemed like he was in a bad mood. The first couple of months he lived there, I didn't see him go outside at all. Somebody would come over and mow his lawn for him every week. I never even saw him getting the mail. I would occasionally just see his car leaving the house or arriving. One night, I was up late playing video games in the living room. I thought I heard something outside our window. I looked out the window to see the bushes moving and the back of someone walking away. I stood there just staring at the man. As he walked away, I could see it was our next door neighbor. I don't think he saw me because he never turned around. I moved to the other window to get a better look, and I could see that it was clearly our next door neighbor. He just walked back into his yard. I told my dad about it, and he went outside to see. My dad came back about 10 minutes later. He said he asked our neighbor if he'd been in our yard, but he denied it and got mad that my dad accused him of it. I know 100% that was him. A few days later, when I was taking the garbage down to the street, I saw the man in his window just staring at me. He had a mad look on his face, and he didn't take his eyes off me the whole time. I don't know what this guy's problem is, but I don't feel comfortable living next to him. A few weeks ago, I went to drop my friend off at his house. I pulled over to the side of the road to let him out. His neighborhood was pretty quiet because it was about midnight. Right as my friend was about to get out of my car, we noticed a car that was parked on the side of the road go into the neighbor's yard and then into their backyard. We found this really odd, and my friend stayed in my car to see what would happen. We then saw lights turn on behind the house, and then a shadow on the house next to it appeared. We could see the shadow of the man, and it started making movements. After trying to figure out what he was doing, we decided that it looked like he was digging a hole in his yard. This was a pretty odd activity for midnight, and my friend and I were suddenly very interested into what was going on. After about 10 minutes, the activity stopped, and we saw somebody walk to the driveway and into a car, and then back inside. I couldn't make out what they looked like because it was so dark out. After about 5 minutes, somebody came to the end of the driveway and looked directly at us and then walked back inside. We were very confused by this whole situation. About another 10 minutes went by, and somebody then came to the end of the driveway again and started staring at us. Then they started walking towards us. I put the car in reverse, backed up, turned around, and drove out of there to my house. My friend slept at my place that night. The creepy part about this is the next day when we went back, their house was completely vacant, and my friend hasn't seen anyone there since. I moved into a new house to live in this year because I was relocated for my job. The first couple of weeks were fine, but recently I had some things go missing inside my house. And weird things too, like food items or some of my clothes. It's been very confusing to me. Until a couple of days ago when I was pulling into my driveway from work and I saw the guy that lives next door in my backyard. When I pulled in, he walked back into his yard and didn't look at me. Sure, he could have been just retrieving something that blew into his yard or whatever, but I just can't help but think they might be related. I know he was good friends with the previous owner of my house, so I feel like maybe he has a spare key or something. Then, last night when I was sleeping, I heard my front door open. I went to the edge of my door and looked to see if it was my next door neighbor. Sure enough, it was. I went out to confront him, but when I did, he turned and ran. I went to his house and knocked on the door. There was no answer. I went back in and called the police. When they arrived, I told them what had happened, but they couldn't find my neighbor anywhere. He disappeared, and I haven't seen him since. He didn't take his car because I didn't see him drive away. Nobody knows where he is.